So we had started to say something about the transcripts, and I had said that you had sent me a comment, and I had just started to respond to it or whatever. And Lauren and I were having a little bit of a conversation about that before you logged in.
And I was just going to say that this whole descriptive experience sampling um, episode is making me it's making me think more about consciousness and making me want to write more about consciousness. And you, at some point, I think you hinted that you're open to potentially write something together. So if it comes to that, I would be, um,
So if I didn't hint it, I would have said it explicitly one way or the other. I'd be happy to think about that.
yeah.
And I would also say the backs and forths that we are having,
Mhm.
in my view, are something like a step in that direction.
Yes.
And whether they would ever be quoted verbatim or imported verbatim or something, I have sometimes done that. In some of my books, I have put them in verbatim and sometimes not. So, for example, the Schwitzgebel book, we had backs and forths, which we, to some degree, edited to
Mhm.
make them a little bit more streamlined. But in my book with Marco Corgioli, they were just straightforward verbatim what's in there. And I think there's advantages and disadvantages either way.
Yes.
And also what I was saying to Lauren just before you logged in was, in the about which is about our procedure, which maybe we should make explicit amongst all of us. What I was saying is that I used in the comment that I made yesterday and you responded to today, I used the word extraneous, and you objected to that word or didn't like that word or reacted to that word or whatever, and actually, the word extraneous is probably not the best word. It's probably, I admit that I wrote that word, but it's probably not exactly what I mean. But that leaves us with, as far as the transcript is concerned, or as far as the commentary is concerned, it leaves us with sort of two options. I could go back and fix that word, and then see whether you have the same reaction to whatever I fixed it with. And if it made it better, then we could delete the part of the comment where you said I didn't like that word, or we could leave that stand, and part of the conversation would be about, well, why did he say that? And
Yeah, I would leave it and keep going.
okay,
If you have more to say, yeah.
yeah, I do have a reaction to that, but I didn't have time to finish writing it. I started it,
Of course.
but we're and the part of our process here is that it is interleaved in the sense that we're having these conversations in the light of part of the previous conversations, but not all of them,
Yes.
and that's just the way it is. I'm
Yes.
not saying that's good or bad. I'm just saying that that is the way it is. So I'm delighted that the conversations that we're having are inciting you to have more to say about consciousness or whatever, and because I think our conversations will refine for each other what we think about it, and that I think will be useful, not only to you and me and Lauren, but to anybody else who is interested in that topic, which I think there's a lot of people.
Yes.
So, anything else we should be talking about before we press on here to beep number one?
Uh, I'm happy to start with the beeps.
And this is day 3, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
So, sample number 3.1. I'm ready.
Okay, so one thing I was really curious to try was a beep while I'm asleep, but instead of doing a nap after going to sleep for the night to see if it would make a difference. And if I could catch myself with nothing in my experience. And you even mentioned, I think last time, that sometimes if people fall asleep when they are woken up by a beep, they do say there was nothing there. It was all blank. Um, but in my case, last night, about an hour after I went to sleep, the beeper beeped, and I remember very clearly and vividly that I was thinking something, or rather, there was a thought in my experience. But once again, nothing of the content of the thought was available by the time I was ready to write it down, other than it was not a dream, it was not visual or sensory, it was a unsymbolized thought. Um, and it was part of a train of thought, but it was not, I don't know, I could not remember any of the content, unfortunately. So that's all I have.
So I experienced myself to have been asleep and to have been thinking about something, but I don't have any direct apprehension of what that something was.
Yeah, I wouldn't say I was experiencing myself to be asleep because that was not part of the experience.
Okay.
But I was asleep. I went to sleep for the night around 10:15, and the beep woke me up around 11:15. Um, so I was asleep for the night. So that's like not even a nap type of sleep. It's like about as sleepy sleep as it gets
Okay.
for me.
Okay.
Um,
And there was, as I heard you correctly, there was what you characterized as an unsymbolized thought.
yes.
And I would like us to bracket that concept, just like I would like us to bracket just about every other concept, on a number of possibilities. One is that what you think of as unsymbolized thinking and I think of as unsymbolized thinking are not necessarily the same thing. Maybe they are, maybe they're not. I don't want to debate that. But what I would, and so that's one thing. And then another thing is, I think it's possible for someone, maybe Gualtiero in this situation, to say, I had an unsymbolized thought. And what that really means in this situation is, I had a thought and there were no words or other symbols, but I don't know what that thought was.
Yes.
Okay.
That's what I mean.
Okay. Which is, and now I'm going to violate the rule that I just said, which is in unsymbolized thinking in my center of the target parlance is I'm thinking about a thought and I know exactly what that thought was. And I know in detail what that thought was. And I can confidently say that there weren't any words or symbol or pictures or any other kind of symbols that carry that.
Yes.
And so what you are labeling as unsymbolized thinking here is not what I would call the center of the target unsymbolized thinking. It is the recognition of a thought as being ongoing, but I don't have the access to any of the content.
But I did have it at the time that it was happening. So when I was happening, I could tell what the content was. But by the time I was ready with the notebook and the pencil, I couldn't remember it.
Okay. So that would indicate that I had enough access to my experience of thinking
Mm-hmm.
that I can say with confidence that I was thinking something specific.
Yes.
And the way that I was thinking that something specific was without words or pictures or any other kind of symbols. But the what that I was thinking, the specific what I was thinking, was gone by the time I wrote it down, which was like some number of seconds later, I gather.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
That's it. I wrote another word on my notes, but I cannot read it anymore, so I don't know what it says. Because I was in the dark,
Right.
it was night, and um, I, unfortunately, I don't know what it says.
So the good news about the descriptive experience sampling from my point of view is that we get a chance to start over afresh with every beep. And so if we lose a detail on a particular beep, like a word that's missing or whatever, then, well, it's a tragedy, but it's a minor tragedy.
Yes.
Because if this kind of thing is going to be a frequent thing for Gualtiero, something that we would be interested in, then it's going to appear later on in some other beep. And if it's a one-off deal, well, then we missed it. And that's just the way it is. So the skeptic would say, I wonder how it is that Gualtiero would be able to remember the form of his thinking without being able to remember the content. And I would bracket that reaction as well. I would note it going by. Well, that the fly on the wall would want to know the answer to that question. And we don't know the answer to that question. It's an interesting question. And that's one of those things where if we are so motivated and we do more sampling while Gualtiero's asleep, maybe we'll figure that out. Or maybe we'll even be able to figure that out from samples that we get while he's awake. Because we may discover something on day 4 or 5 or whatever that would cause us to think back. Well, remember that back on day 3.1, beep 3.1, he said this. And that's part of what I consider the fair game of the process.
Yeah. So
the process is, from my point of view, I'm going to record, and I guess I haven't been sending these to you. I probably should, but I have been recording what I call contemporaneous notes about what you have said, which are not really contemporaneous, but they're pretty close. They're in the same day, and I have I don't accept those notes as being perfect characterizations of Gualtiero's experience. I treat them as constraints on my wild speculations. I can't go off on a wild tangent and leave those notes entirely behind. I have to. It's one of what I guess I called the handrails of the DES method. So when I write this down, I will say he said there's some reason for skepticism of it, but his understanding was that he remembered the manner of thinking without remembering the content.
Yeah. You sent the first one, the first day.
Right. We good about number 1?
Okay. Shall we move to second week?
Let's do it. Unless
Okay.
Lauren has a question.
So at that point, this morning, I was looking at a 0% balance transfer offer on my Bank of America phone app. I had just thought I should try to do a balance transfer and navigate it away from that offer page to a page that just showed my HELOC balance, HELOC being home equity line of credit, and some other generic banking app information. And my experience was a visual experience of that bank app page on my phone. It was somewhat diffuse without my attention being focused on any particular detail. I have a vague sense that perhaps there was an echo of the previous thought, the thought that I should try to do a balance transfer using one of these deals. But the thought had already, like the main part of the thought, or the main, activation of the thought had already passed. So insofar as there was anything like it, it was sort of just, I'm calling it an echo, meaning like a sensation that I had just thought that, but the thought was already past. And that's the end of my notes.
So let me see whether one part that I didn't quite understand fully, and that is, so my eyeballs are aimed at this new page.
Yes, the phone screen, yes.
The phone screen. And is that what I'm seeing when you said I'm seeing the phone app and it's diffuse and not detailed or whatever. Is
Yeah, so what's showing on the phone screen is the banking app page on a screen that shows the HELOC balance, and then there's a bunch of other little things. I took a screenshot, so
I don't need to see that.
yeah,
What I want to make sure of is that what your experience is of that page. It's not like I'm remembering the previous app. It's the previous
right,
page. So it's of
yeah,
that page.
yeah.
But I don't see it with clarity. Is that right?
Um, I don't, I'm not focusing on any specific detail on it. It's more of a diffuse experience of the whole thing. Does that make sense? So, you can, visually you can focus on just this,
The HELOC
photo,
balance or
region,
whatever.
let's say, or yes, like the helic balance, or you can just sort of take in something bigger. And at that moment, I felt like I was just visually experiencing the whole thing, not specifically the helic balance or some other detail on the page.
And and is this more a visual experience or more like a cognitive recognition? I'm I'm understanding this as a
I'd
display of
say
my
it
balances.
was a visual experience. Maybe there was probably at least the awareness that the figure on the page is my HELOC balance, like probably because it says HELOC on that page. Um, so that might have been at least something that I recognized, even maybe faintly, but not, but I wasn't focusing on it actively because it wasn't, I was just moving away from the previous page, and I had been on that previous page for a purpose, but now I was sort of navigating away, so I didn't really have a purpose to be on that one page. There was nothing specific that I wanted to do there or that I wanted to learn from there. So it was
So the
transitional.
so what I understand is that this experience is more a visual taking in, a,
Hmm.
a seeing of the whole page
Yes.
without any of its specifics, but without denying any of its specifics, but a
Right.
visual taking in of the whole page
Yes.
without a particular cognitive consideration of it, which is not to deny that there's no cognition going on, but what I understand you to be saying is this is primarily a visual apprehension rather than a amount of my balance apprehension, say.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. And does that adequately describe that portion of the experience? We haven't yet gotten to the echo, but
Yes.
so what I've got so far is I'm seeing this page. It's a seeing experience, not a meta experience. It's not like I'm experiencing myself to be seeing, but I am seeing, and
Yes.
it's more the visual characteristics than the financial or cognitive characteristics. And at the same time, there may be an echo of I should do the take advantage of this deal or whatever.
Yes.
And how does that present itself to you?
Um, so this is one of those situations where it's hard to, it's hard to, for me to know whether I really was perceiving or sensing or experiencing that echo of a thought at the moment, or whether the beep made me ask myself, what am I experiencing? And in my kind of momentary attempt to review what might have been in my experience, since I realized that right before the time, right before the beep, I was thinking about taking advantage of this offer. I probably still had some echo of that in my mind. You know what I'm saying? It's that question that we've run into before. to what extent can I really directly apprehend what was in that moment, in my experience at the moment, versus what I might have inferred in the process of gathering information to write down in my notes. So that being said, though, I would consider it entirely possible that at that moment, in a faint way, there was a sense of a cognitive thought, unsymbolized, I would say, of wanting to use one of these 0% interest balance transfer offers.
So is that to say that that as far as your total experiential package, whatever that is, which I would like to leave somewhat vague, is that there's part of it that is visually apprehending, non-specifically visually apprehending the app on the screen, and possibly cognitively thinking, well, I should really make this balance transfer.
Or at least like the echo of that, like some kind of residue
And
after having thought that.
and does it make sense to try to put a number on how much of your experience is this visual apprehension and how much is this echo?
Yeah. If the echo was real at the moment and not inferred, I would put it at maybe 15, 20% maximum of my experience.
So I understand that to be saying my experience is pretty much by far dominantly 80, 90%-ish at this visual stuff.
Yes.
And I'm allowing for the possibility that there's some cognitive stuff too. And maybe it's 0 and maybe it's 10, 15, 20, something like that.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. So that's fine with me. I'm totally happy with that kind of difficulty, because I think descriptive experience sampling and all other introspection short of nirvana is going to have this kind of what I would call in the weeds characteristics that we can't discriminate. And I've written, actually, I've got a paper out there with Eric about little or nothing in experience. And I don't think you can make a distinction. There are those who would like to make a distinction between having a little and having none. And just as you're struggling with it right now, I think that's not possible to make in many, maybe even most situations. And so I say, well, if we can't make it, well, we'll do the best we can. We'll allow it's little or nothing, whether it's, and we can't really discriminate between little or nothing. That's how I understand what we're saying here. Yeah. Is that right?
Yes.
And I think that's just the way it is. And so that doesn't disturb me in the slightest. And I think and from an iterative point of view, I think my acceptance of that, which I'm hoping will be your acceptance and Lauren's acceptance of that too, will make it perhaps easier to discriminate between little or no, to the extent that we can discriminate that as we go forward. Because I'm accepting that maybe it's not possible. And so it would not be a high stakes, this is not a high stakes consideration for me. Let's do the best we can, like we do for everything else. But
yes.
The philosophical, I guess, position of between little or nothing is, like if a guy's got 1 penny, then you would say, you can't say he has no money. But if he's got all he's got is 1 penny, he's pretty much in the I got no money camp. And so I think we just can't, there's limits to what we can do. Lauren? Lauren, you good with this? Number 3.
Okay, so there's a one beep that I really want to get to, just so you know, and it's the last one of the day.
You want to do it now?
Yeah, we could do it now.
And so let's go to number 6. Is it number
Yeah, I
6?
think it's number 6, and I think it's the most interesting of the remaining 5, besides the one from last night.
Let's do it.
Um, so I wait a minute. Oh, maybe that's not the one. Maybe that was the one before. Hold on a second. Oh yeah, okay. Yeah, it's the one before. So it's not number 6, it's number 5. Oops,
Okay. Okay.
my bad.
No problem.
I had my eyes closed and I was relaxing and almost asleep, maybe kind of in between, in the twilight zone between wakefulness and sleep. And I was imagining a friend of mine whose name is Dean, but I don't think that was in the experience, but I knew who she was. And she's a radiologist, and she was taking an X-ray of a patient, and it was a vivid, dreamlike visual image, which usually I cannot form, when I'm fully awake because I have aphantasia, but I do dream sometimes, and I can have visual images like that are like vivid, like those that normal people report if I am in the twilight zone, like if I'm like kind of half asleep. Um, so it was like that. So the important thing is that it was visual, it was vivid. Um, I knew what it was about. It was dynamic, like things were moving, happening in it. Um, and so it's a good contrast to all those other times when I said, oh, that's not symbolized. There's no sensory content, there's no symbols. This time there was, and there was visual imagery.
So what did you see exactly?
I saw there was machinery, like X-ray machinery, and there was Dean um, moving around the machine, maybe turning it on to take the X-ray, something like that. I don't think I could see the patient, at least at the time of the beep. Maybe the patient had been in the imagery before, but not at the time of the beep. At the time of the beep, all that I remember is the radiologist, the machine, the X-ray machine, and maybe the operating the machine. You know how like you have to go behind in like some kind of little cabin to press buttons and turn it on to protect yourself from the X-rays, something like that. Maybe it was something like that.
And and so you see Dean moving around this X-ray apparatus,
Yes.
and she disappears for part of this. Is that true, or do you not actually
No,
see that?
no, because she was in the front.
Okay.
Yeah.
And do you see her from the front or from the back?
From the side, I would say she was.
Which side? Do you see her the
Uh,
left side of her face, or do you see the right side of her
well,
face?
it was the whole body. I could see her whole body.
Head to toe?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Um, I can't swear that I saw the toes or even the feet, but certainly I had this sensation of a whole human body,
Okay.
including head, torso, arms, legs.
Okay.
I, I,
That's what I was looking for by asking about whether it's the
yeah,
head to toe. It
yeah,
could have been like just a headshot. And,
right. No, 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 no. It wasn't just a headshot. It was a whole body, with hair, like long, dark hair, some kind of clothes on her body, but that's vague. Um, and I don't know if I can tell which side I was looking at. That's a little too specific at this point. Like, I'm not, that's not to say that it was not in my experience at the moment. It's just that I wouldn't be able to remember now.
okay. So at the moment of the beep, I see Dean clearly from the side, moving back and forth around this X-ray stuff.
Yeah, and she might have turned to, like maybe she came one way, then she turned and like pressed some button on the machine to take the X-ray, and then she came out or something like that. And this is reconstructed, I
Okay.
cannot swear that this is exactly how it went, but it was something along these lines. There was movement, there was action, there was, the whole body of the radiologist in interaction with the X-ray system.
And do I see Dean clearly?
Yeah,
So this is not just some radiologist that I happen to know to be Dean. I see Dean.
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, yes, I would say so. I mean, not super precisely, but I had the feeling that I could see her clearly enough that I knew who she was based on her appearance, not that, so yeah, sometimes in dreams, like somebody doesn't even look like they would look in real life, but somehow it's them. That's not how it was.
Okay. And in color.
I don't know if it was color.
Okay. But definitely in motion.
Yes, definitely motion, definitely visual.
And and was anything else in your experience at this moment,
No,
including there was no affective or analytical or whatever?
no.
I'm not by any means suggesting that there should be. I just want to make sure I'm asking sort of for the complete picture here. So for whatever reason, which I don't actually know what that reason is, but for whatever reason, I am seeing Dean, who is a radiologist, doing her radiology thing.
Yeah, and it's not something I've ever seen, and it was not an intentional effort. It was not due to a decision or an intention to imagine her. It was a spontaneous imagery that just happened on its own because I was in the twilight zone and I wasn't fully awake.
Okay. All right. So I'm good about that. I got a couple of comments. One is whether it was intentional or not. I don't think we know. I don't think I know. I'm pretty sure I don't know. And probably you don't know either because where intentions come from, I don't really know. But I don't really care unless the intention is directly experienced. I don't. That's one of the many things that I would bracket away. And I would also like to know how to spell Dean.
Oh, Dean.
Okay. Seems pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
And then I think I'm good about that. So shall we go back to number 3?
Yeah, I would just add that if I had been awake and you had asked me, imagine Dean and the radiology machine and Dean is operating that, I would not have been able to do that with the vividness that I experienced in this case. And so that's also a clue for me that that was not an intentional act of imagining something, but that it was a dreamlike image that formed in my mind in a sort of spontaneous way at that moment.
Well, as I suppose it's not going to be a surprise, I would say I'm going to bracket that away, and because I've sampled with a lot of people who say I never have visual imagery, and then come a beep where they had visual imagery and they're wide awake. So I don't, and I'm not suggesting that we're going to find a beep with visual imagery. What I'm just going to say is, for me, there is a big distinction between experience that is directly apprehended, such as at this particular moment I was seeing this woman, Dean, my friend Dean, who's a radiologist, whatever, and at some other moment I was seeing the visual display of my app. Those I think we can describe with substantial confidence and say, well, this is Pretty darn likely what Gualtiero was experiencing at that particular beep,
Hmm.
and everything else is in my world sort of questionable.
Okay.
And that's not to say I don't believe anybody, and I believe everybody just like everybody else does, but it's a different kind of level for me
Yeah.
that I refer to as the difference between diamonds and glass. And the individual samples are diamonds in the sense that we can be pretty confidently clear about the edges of these diamonds. You know, I was having a visual experience of my app, and maybe out beyond this facet of the diamond there was some cognitive or echoey thought process. Maybe not. So I think we can be pretty good about that. Not perfect, but pretty good. Whereas about generalities, which is what I refer to as glass, it's pretty hard to be that confident. It's not to say they're not true or pretty or whatever, but
Okay.
number 3.
Number 3, I was reading Russ's response to my comments. I was having a diffuse experience of red line text on my computer screen. I wasn't focusing on any particular word. So it was just a visual experience of word statements on the screen. And I guess I was probably aware that they were your red line comments, but I wasn't reading anything in particular at that moment.
So at the moment of this beep, I am actively reading. Is that true?
No, I was reading, but at the moment of the beep, I wasn't reading anything. I was just
So let me define what I mean by reading, because I was pretty sloppy about that. I should have said something like, at the moment of the beep, my eyeballs are aimed at the screen, and
Mhm.
are they tracking across the screen in the way that like if I were sitting there, I would say, well, he's reading. Not, of course, knowing anything because I'm not a mind reader, knowing your experience, but or from your have you seemed to sort of withdrawn from the reading?
Yeah, I think at that moment I had withdrawn from the reading and I was just, visually aware of the words on the page without, you know, processing any specific word or any specific sequence of words.
And you've mentioned a couple of times that it's the red lines on the page. Is it more about I'm seeing the redness of these words, or seeing the words that happen to be red?
Yeah, the latter. I've seen the words that happen to be read.
Okay. But
I
we
don't
have,
even, they might not even have been read. They were, the text that is redlined or, that has the vertical line on the side and maybe they didn't appear read yet. And they appeared yet read after I accepted the change.
okay. And and so far we haven't said anything at all about the content of this.
Yeah, because
We have
there's
just
nothing more.
so there's no content present to you at the moment of the beep.
No, besides the visual presence of the words on the screen.
So
And maybe the aware, like the vague sense that they were your response to my comments that you wrote those. Like I knew that and I wrote that as in my note. Um, but it might not even have been part of the experience. It might just have been something that I knew because I was reading your response.
so at least at least the context
Hmm.
was you're reading what I had written.
Yes.
Whether that is experientially directly apprehendable at the particular moment, maybe not.
Yeah.
Probably not. If it was in this little or no category.
Yeah.
But
Yes.
what is in my experience is a visual apprehension of the page. And is it of the words on the page, or just the visual of the page themselves?
Yeah, the words, the text on the page. Um, yes.
So is this experience the same or different from the, I see the, in maybe beep number two, where I see in the app balance, HELOC balance, whatever, I'm taking in that app we said.
Yeah, I would say it's like that.
It's like that.
I'm taking it in, but it's not actively processing anything on the page.
And no more nor less worded. The words are equally present in both of these experiences. My eyeballs, the obviously words falling on my retina,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I know them to be words. Whether that's context or experience is hard to say.
Yeah, the difference is that in the first case, there were relatively few words on the screen, and there was some, there's some, I don't know, graphics. Um, Whereas in the second case, it was all words.
And is it words that you see, or is it the lexicography, I guess you might say, of the words? They're lines and spaces and indentations and
Yeah, it's more like the latter. It's text. It's an experience of linguistic text, but that's it's written text. It's not. Of course, the text itself is clustered into words, but that's
and
not really the big.
and is that to say that if what I had written had been in Italian, say, your experience would have been sort of the same about it? It would have been in both cases there.
Yeah, I'd say so.
So it's the apprehension of text,
Yeah,
not of particular words.
yes.
Okay. Then I think I'm good about that. You happy with that, Lauren? Number four.
I was looking at the thermostat while singing to turn on the heat, and the word heat, spelled with a capital H, um, on the light brown plastic cover of the thermostat was in my visual experience. I was about to push the switch, so maybe I was aware of my motor intention to push the switch. And I was probably faintly aware of my singing. I did become aware of the singing after I heard the beep, so that's another one of those cases where, by the time the beep comes and I'm trying to do an inventory of what I was experiencing, I knew I had been singing, so I also thought, oh, I might have been at least a little bit, like say 20% aware of the singing. But I certainly was aware of the word heat on the thermostat against the background of the whole thermostat, and of my intention to push the button so that it would start heating the house.
So is that to say that the primary aspect of your experience is the word heat or the seeing of the word heat or the intention of turning up the heat or seeing the thermostat?
I'd say at least, 56, at least maybe 60%, 60, I would say about 50, 60% of the content of the experience was the word heat on the background of the whole thermostat. So that's, I had some awareness of the whole thermostat, which is gray and plastic. But the word heat was the focus because that's where the button is, and that's where I have to push the button. I have to push it towards the word heat. There's like the word heat, the word cool, and the word off or something. I don't remember exactly, but the goal was to turn on the heat. So push it towards heat. So where's the word heat? I have to push it that way.
So is it more about, I don't know how to ask this question. More about the semantics of the word heat. That I know that heat has to do with heating my house, or is it more about this is the target that I need to push, and I have set myself the task of pushing this target, and that's the center of my target. Does that distinction make sense to you?
It's a good question. I'd say, as best I can remember, the main aspect of the experience was the visual appearance of the word heat itself. But the reason that was salient is that I wanted to turn on the heat and therefore I needed to push the button towards that word. So the meaning of the word was salient and presumably at least something I understood and was relevant in the context. So I think it would be fair to say that the meaning of the word was also an aspect of the experience.
So is that to say that the experience is sort of, at least this aspect of the experience, this is more about the way this word looks, but not entirely. And
Yeah.
and by more we could leave that as 51-49 or 60-40 or whatever. And
Yeah.
it is at least to a large degree, maybe the primary degree,
Yeah.
about the visual impression of the word rather than the semantic
Yeah.
meaning of
Yeah.
the word.
So yeah, insofar as I can try to just remember what I was experiencing as opposed to inferring what I must have been experiencing, I would say it was primarily just a visual experience of the shape of the word, but I think it's at least plausible that there was awareness of its meaning as well.
Okay. So as sort of an aside, but I would say this kind of thing, and if I were not speaking with a philosopher or whatever, what I would say is that the conversation that we're having today,
Mhm.
maybe all of the conversation we're having today, is at least as much about tomorrow, next week, as it is about this particular sample. And what I mean by that is we are refining the distinction. There's a couple of places where we've had a distinction between words as semantic tokens and words as visual presentations. And we have come down on the side of visual presentations.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
what I would say about that is and this is relevant to one of the comments that you made, and my reply to it is, I would like us next time to recognize, well, we've made this kind of a distinction, and of course we're going to remember that we made a distinction in that particular way, but I don't want us to presume that we made it correctly today. I want us next time to recognize, well, there is a distinction between seeing a word as a visual display and seeing a word as a semantic token, and that seems to be sort of relevant, but maybe not. But
Yeah.
for sure, let's not fall into the trap of saying, well, I want to be consistent, and I said last time I said it was more about visual and less about semantics. What I would prefer us to do is to say, well, we've made that distinction. Let's even keep that distinction as what I would call a bracketed deal, which is to say, maybe we should determine that even trying to make that distinction was probably a wrong turn that we took on day 3, and we should probably try to correct that on day 4 or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what I call the iterative procedure, where we are trying to get better at describing the phenomenon as the phenomenon occurred, and a lot of that is about determining what counts as a phenomenon, what is or
Yeah.
is
And
not
part of the
doing.
challenge is that when you're looking at a word and you're reading a word and you're understanding a word, at least for me, you don't really experience the visual appearance of the word separately from the meaning of the word. It's kind of unified. Um, I mean, many aspects of experience are unified in this kind of way. You know, you see a person and you see the distance they're at and the texture, the color, the shape, they're all unified. You don't experience them separately, even though they might be different parts of the brain that represent them to some degree, but they're all together.
So what I would say about that is on retrospection or on armchair introspection, it is almost impossible and probably and maybe even absolutely impossible to separate out the visual aspects from the semantic aspects of a word.
Mm-hmm.
At the moment of the beep today, you seem to say, at a moment of the beep, I can separate those things out. They were more visual than they were semantic. And I would say, well, let's keep that as a possibility, but not as an actuality. And for one thing, it does point to the limitations of retrospection or introspection. Mm-hmm. That if it is possible to distinguish between the visual characteristics and the semantic characteristics of words, the only way that you could ever see that would be to do something like we're doing right now. And so you wouldn't possibly have had access to that without a beeper that says, at this particular moment, what is it?
Yeah.
But I also want to be totally on the record, which I think I have been, as saying I don't really care whether there's a semantic characteristic to the words or a visual characteristic to the word, whether that's primary or not. I don't have a theory about that. What I do care about is trying to get at Gualtiero's experience as Gualtiero experienced it. And if that's a in whatever the word is, an indistinguishable mix between semantic and visual, fine. But if it's not, well, then that's fine too. We gotta work at it.
Yeah.
Then I didn't understand I was singing. What was I singing? Did you say I was singing Turn on the Heat?
No, I was singing something, but I don't remember what I was singing.
So I was singing a song of some sort, or singing a...
Yeah. Sometimes I sing made-up songs that I make up as I go.
Okay. So and singing, this was out loud singing. So if I had been in the room, I would have heard this singing.
Yeah.
Okay. And whether that was part of my experience at the moment, maybe, I guess I was somewhat or slightly or something aware of it, but not predominantly.
Yes.
And so most predominantly I was about the visual display, possibly the semantically visual display or whatever, of the word heat against the gray thermostat.
Yes.
Then I think I'm good. You happy, Lauren? Then we've got one left, I think, number 6. Is that right? 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, number 6.
Yeah, I don't know if we want to get to that since we're almost out of time. I had an independent question that just popped into my head. Can I ask you that?
Yes.
Did you get a sense that from the interaction with you, Eric Schwitzgebel ended up more persuaded that it's possible to learn something informative about experience from descriptive experience sampling, or he remained about as skeptical as he was at the beginning? Or what was his journey, cognitively with respect to what we can learn from descriptive experience sampling, as best you we
Well,
can.
if you really want to know what he thought, you probably ought to ask him. But what I would say about what I think about that was, I think he came to think that I was pretty good at asking questions about his inner experience,
Hmm.
probably better than anybody else that he had run across. I think that's probably fair to say that that's what he thought. And I think he came to believe that what I said was reasonable and possibly true.
Hmm.
But I don't know that he came to believe that it was true.
Hmm.
I think maybe it would be fair to say that if there was something to be said about inner experience, that I was a pretty good guy to say it. But
Hmm.
maybe there still wasn't anything good to be said about inner experience.
Got it. Okay. Yeah.
But I'm not 100% sure that that's what he thought, and I'm also not sure that I think it if you had asked him that question immediately after we were done,
Hmm.
he might have given you a different answer. There might have been a different answer than if you asked him now.
Yeah. Did he do any descriptive experience sampling himself or
Yeah,
just, oh, he did.
but it was. So the backstory to that is that we met for the first time at a Tucson conference, consciousness conference,
Hmm.
where I gave a paper saying that you ought to do something like descriptive experience sampling, and he in the same session gave a session. I gave a paper that said that was not possible, and uh, and and then we had a conversation afterwards, and in that conversation I said, well, you ought to wear the beeper. I happen to have a beeper with me. Do you want to wear it? And so he wore the beeper in Tucson, took it back, I think, on the plane, and maybe wore it for one more day after that. And in the course of that, decided, well, he was not the ideal subject because he's on the record as a card-carrying skeptic about these kinds of things, and so it's probably a good idea to get somebody else. And
Yeah.
and then coincidentally enough, that I was being introduced to this woman that we ended up calling Melanie, who's the subject of that book,
Yeah.
who
Yeah.
I didn't know, but who had an interest in psychology and was a friend of a friend kind of a deal. And then they said, you ought to go talk to her. Roberta has interesting things to say about this kind of stuff. And so she did, and I said, well, Eric and I were looking for a subject you want to be in.
Yeah.
See what
Yeah.
happens.
So for Lauren's benefit, this is Eric Schwitzbagel that we're talking about. He and Russ wrote a book that came out of this whole collaboration that I reviewed, by the way. And that's how I kind of started interacting with Russ, I think. Or anyway, we did sort of meet online at that time that I wrote the review. And I wrote a paper on descriptive experience sampling too.
So I think people do things for a lot of different reasons, and which is what, part of the diamonds versus glass commentary that I was making a little bit ago. The one thing that I think there is a pretty much a right answer to what was going on in Gualtiero's experience at the moment that beep 3.5 or whatever occurred,
Mhm.
and whether we can. It's not going to be a perfect answer, but it's going to be a pretty good answer, I think.
Yeah, I agree.
Maybe maybe even a very good answer.
I agree.
And about any other kind of questions, they're shiny and but they're hard to, you know, whether it's what Eric thinks about descriptive experience sampling. Well, you know, that's a complicated deal when you really dig into it, and
Right.
you know
Well, thank you for,
what the Democratic strategy should be to counter Trump. That's a complicated question, and and about which there is vital importance, but no right answer. And but pristine inner experience is the kind of a thing which I think is interesting, and comes close to having a right answer, I think. But I'm not trying to, not even trying to talk you into that. I'd be happy to have you demonstrate for me that I'm mistaken about that. It'd be
I
sort of
agree with you.
best possible outcome.
Very good.
So, shall we put this on the calendar for another time?
Yeah.